What happens when a simple birthday dinner turns into a legal nightmare? I'm Zuleika Morven, and I never imagined that one evening of brutal honesty would destroy everything I'd built. Some people say I went too far that night. Others claim I got what I deserved. But here's my side of the story. The real truth about how a few careless words at my boyfriend's parents' birthday dinner led me straight into a courtroom showdown that changed my life forever. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The Renshaw family home always felt like a museum to me. All those perfectly arranged family photos, the spotless kitchen counters, and that suffocating sense of tradition hanging in the air like expensive perfume. As I adjusted my black dress in their hallway mirror, I could already hear the familiar sounds of Martin and Elspeth Renshaw bustling around their dining room, preparing for what they insisted on calling their intimate family celebration. Intimate. Right, with 23 people crammed into their modest dining room. "Zuleika, you look beautiful," Elliot said, appearing behind me with that gentle smile I'd fallen for 3 years ago. At 35, my husband still had that boyish charm that made other women jealous. Too bad his parents looked like they'd been hit by the ugly truck and then backed over for good measure. "Thanks, honey," I replied, forcing my own smile. "Are you ready for this circus?" Elliot's expression tightened slightly. "They're trying to make this special for us. Mom spent all day cooking your favorite dishes." I bit back my first response. Elspeth's idea of my favorite dishes usually involved overcooking everything until it resembled cardboard. But tonight was supposed to be about keeping the peace, at least according to Elliot's endless lectures about family harmony. The dining room buzzed with conversation as we entered. Martin, Elliot's father, stood near the head of the table, wearing a sweater that had definitely seen better decades. His thinning hair was combed over in a way that fooled absolutely nobody, and those thick glasses made his eyes look like a confused owl's. Elspeth, meanwhile, had chosen a floral dress that did nothing for her expanding waistline and clashed horribly with her badly dyed red hair. "Zuleika! Elliot!" Elspeth rushed over, her arms outstretched. "Oh, you both look wonderful," I submitted to her enthusiastic hug, breathing in her overwhelming rose perfume. "Thank you, Elspeth. You look festive." The dinner conversation flowed around topics I found mind-numbingly boring. Martin's latest golf game, Elspeth's garden club drama, and endless questions about when Elliot and I might give them grandchildren. I smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals, but my patience was wearing thin. "So, Zuleika," said Elliot's Aunt Patricia, a woman whose voice could cut glass, "how's your project management work going?" "It's going very well, actually," I replied, grateful for a topic I could actually engage with. "We just landed a major client, and I'm leading the implementation team." "That sounds impressive," Martin chimed in, adjusting his ridiculous glasses. "Elliot always says you're the ambitious one in the relationship." Something in his tone rubbed me the wrong way. The ambitious one, as if Elliot was just some passive participant in our life together. "Well," I said, my voice taking on a sharper edge, "someone has to be the driving force. Not everyone can be content with the same routine year after year." Elliot shot me a warning look, but I was just getting started. The wine had loosened my tongue, and honestly, I was tired of pretending this family's dysfunction was charming. "Speaking of driving forces," I continued, turning to face Martin and Elspeth directly, "I have to ask, where do you two shop for clothes? Because I've been wondering if there's some special store for people who've completely given up on looking presentable." The table went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that overstuffed dining room. Elspeth's face flushed red, clashing even more horribly with her hair. Excuse me?" "Oh, come on," I laughed, looking around at the shocked faces. "We're all family here, right? We can be honest with each other. Martin, That comb-over isn't fooling anyone. And Elspeth, that dress makes you look like a walking garden centre explosion. Zuleika. Elliot's voice was low and dangerous. Stop, right now. But I was on a roll. What? I'm just being real. Everyone else is thinking it, but they're too polite to say anything. At least I'm honest enough to... Get out! Martin's voice was quiet but firm. Get out of my house. Dad, please. Elliot started. No. Martin stood up, his hands shaking slightly. I will not sit here and listen to someone insult my wife in our own home. Zuleika, you need to leave, now. I looked around the table at all those judgmental faces staring back at me. Even 6-year-old Mila, Elliot's niece, was watching with wide, confused eyes. Fine, I said, standing up and grabbing my purse. But don't pretend you're all so perfect. At least I have the courage to tell the truth, instead of living in some fantasy world where everyone pretends everything is wonderful. I stormed out, leaving Elliot to deal with the aftermath. As I sat in my car in their driveway, I could see through the dining room window as Elliot tried to calm his parents down. Elspeth was crying, and Martin had his arm around her shoulders. Good, I thought. Maybe now they'll think twice before judging me. When Elliot finally came home 3 hours later, he went straight to the guest bedroom without saying a word. I found him there the next morning, and when I tried to explain that his parents were just being overly sensitive, he looked at me like he'd never seen me before. They're not the problem, Zuleika, he said quietly. You are. That should have been my first clue that this was bigger than just a family dinner gone wrong. Work became my refuge after that disastrous dinner. At least at Morrison & Associates, people appreciated my directness and drive. I threw myself into my projects with renewed energy, staying late most nights and volunteering for weekend assignments. If Elliot wanted to sulk about his parents' hurt feelings, that was his choice. It was during one of those late evenings that I really noticed Casey Vole from the IT department. I'd worked with him before on various projects, but something about the way he listened to my complaints about home life made me see him differently. Casey was 29, with dark hair and an easy smile that made me feel appreciated in a way Elliot hadn't in months. Your husband doesn't understand how hard you work, Casey said one Thursday evening as we shared Chinese takeout in the empty conference room. If my wife was as successful and driven as you, I'd be celebrating that, not making her feel guilty about it. Exactly, I said, feeling validated for the first time in weeks. Instead, Elliot acts like I'm some kind of monster because I told his parents the truth. They needed to hear it. Casey nodded sympathetically. Family drama is the worst. My ex-wife's family was the same way, always taking offense at everything, never able to handle honest feedback. I found myself staying even later at work, timing my schedule to overlap with Casey's. We started having regular dinners together, ostensibly to discuss ongoing projects, but our conversations quickly moved beyond work topics. Casey understood my frustration in a way Elliot never had. You know what your problem is? Casey said one evening as we walked to the parking garage together. You're too good for the people in your life. They can't handle someone who refuses to play their little games. When Elliot questioned my late nights, I told him he was being paranoid and controlling. I'm working hard to build our future, I explained. Maybe if you supported me instead of questioning every decision I make, we wouldn't have these problems. I do support you, Elliot replied, his voice tired. But you've been different since the dinner with my parents. Distant, angry all the time. I'm not angry, I snapped. I'm focused. There's a difference. But the truth was, I was angry. Angry at Elliot for choosing his parents' feelings over mine. Angry at his family for making me feel like the villain when all I'd done was speak honestly. And increasingly, I was angry at Elliot for not being more like Casey, someone who actually listened to me and made me feel valued. My sister Sophie called one evening while I was deleting text messages from Casey before Elliot got home. Mom told me about the dinner, Sophie said without preamble. She's worried about you. There's nothing to worry about, I replied, quickly closing my phone as I heard Elliot's car in the driveway. I just finally stood up for myself instead of letting his family walk all over me. Zuleika, calling someone's parents ugly to their faces isn't standing up for yourself. It's just cruel. You weren't there, Sophie. You don't understand the dynamic. I understand that you hurt people who love Elliot, and now you're punishing him for being upset about it. I hung up on her. The last thing I needed was another lecture about my behavior. When Elliot came home that night, he found me in the kitchen, aggressively cleaning dishes that were already clean. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "About what?" I didn't turn around. "About us. About what's happening to our marriage." "Nothing's happening to our marriage that a little support from you wouldn't fix." "Zuleika, look at me." I turned around reluctantly. Elliot looked exhausted, older than his 35 years. "My parents haven't spoken to me in 2 weeks," he said. "They're hurt and confused, and honestly, so am I. The woman I married wouldn't have said those things." "The woman you married was tired of pretending everything was perfect when it wasn't. But attacking my parents' appearance, in front of everyone, that's not honesty, Zuleika, that's cruelty." I felt my temper flare. "Your parents judge me constantly. They think I'm not good enough for you, not domestic enough, not traditional enough. At least I had the courage to be direct about it." "They never said any of those things. They didn't have to. It's written all over their faces every time they look at me." Elliot ran his hands through his hair. "This isn't about my parents anymore. This is about you and me. We're falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it." For a moment, I almost told him about Casey, almost explained that I'd found someone who actually understood and appreciated me. But something held me back. Maybe the last shred of my conscience, or maybe just self-preservation. "Maybe we need some space," I said instead. "Maybe you should stay in the guest room for a while." Elliot's face crumpled slightly, but he nodded. "If that's what you want." "It's what we both need." That night, as I lay alone in our king-size bed, I texted Casey. "Things are getting complicated at home." His response came quickly. "I'm here if you need to talk, always." I smiled and deleted the message thread, just like I'd been doing every night for the past month. Elliot was too trusting to check my phone anyway, too naive to realize that his neglect was pushing me towards someone who actually valued what I had to offer. I told myself I was just protecting my options. 3 weeks later, it was Elliot's 36th birthday. Despite everything that had happened, he wanted to celebrate with dinner at Marcello's, the upscale Italian restaurant where we'd had our first anniversary. I agreed to go, partly because I thought it might help repair our relationship, but mostly because I missed feeling like part of a social circle. Elliot had invited 12 people, a mix of his work colleagues, college friends, and yes, his parents. When I saw Martin and Elspeth walk into the restaurant, I felt that familiar surge of irritation. Elspeth had clearly made an effort with her appearance, wearing a navy dress that was actually flattering, and Martin had gotten a proper haircut, but all I could think about was how they'd made me feel like a pariah for the past month. "Zuleika," Elspeth said carefully as she approached our table, "you look lovely." "Thank you," I replied coolly. "You look different." The dinner started pleasantly enough. Elliot's friend Dave regaled us with stories from their college days, and his colleague Jennifer shared embarrassing anecdotes from the accounting firm. I found myself relaxing, enjoying the wine and the attention. But as the evening progressed, I noticed how everyone seemed to gravitate toward Elliot's parents. They asked Martin about his recent retirement, complimented Elspeth on her homemade bread recipe, and generally treated them like beloved family patriarchs. The same parents I'd called out for their appearance just a month ago. "So, Martin," said Dave, raising his wine glass, "what's the secret to 38 years of marriage?" Martin smiled and took Elspeth's hand. "Patience, forgiveness, and choosing love, even when it's difficult." Everyone around the table made appreciative noises. I felt my jaw clench. "That's beautiful," Jennifer said. "You two are such an inspiration." I couldn't help myself. "Really? An inspiration?" The table turned to look at me. Elliot's eyes held a warning, but I was already committed to the path. "I mean, let's be honest here," I continued, my voice carrying clearly across the table. "Martin, you spent the first 20 years of your marriage looking like you'd given up on life, and Elspeth, that hair color you had at our last dinner, looked like you'd dunked your head in a paint bucket." The silence was immediate and crushing. "But hey," I laughed, taking another sip of wine, "at least you're trying now, right? Better late than never." "Zuleika," Elliot's voice was barely controlled. "Stop." "What? I'm just being real. Everyone else is sitting here pretending like—" "Like what?" Dave interrupted, his friendly demeanor completely gone. "Like we care about people's feelings, like we have basic human decency. Like you're all too polite to acknowledge the obvious," I shot back. "At least I'm honest enough to say what everyone's thinking." "Nobody was thinking that," Jennifer said firmly. "You're the only one obsessing over people's appearance." I looked around the table at their shocked, disapproving faces. Even the waitstaff had stopped what they were doing to stare at our table. "This is ridiculous," I said, standing up. "I make one honest observation and suddenly I'm the villain. Martin and Elspeth are adults. They can handle a little constructive feedback." "Constructive feedback?" Elspeth's voice was shaking. "You called us ugly, twice, in front of people we care about." "I called you honest things that someone who cared about you should have mentioned years ago." Martin stood up slowly, his face pale. "Come on, Elspeth, we're leaving." "Dad, please," Elliot started. "No, son, I won't subject your mother to any more of this cruelty. We love you, but we can't be around her." As Martin and Elspeth gathered their coats and left, the rest of the table sat in stunned silence. Little Milla, who had been colouring quietly in her colouring book, looked up with confused eyes. "Why is Grandma crying?" she asked. Nobody answered her. Dave threw his napkin on the table. "I can't believe you just did that. On Elliot's birthday, no less." "Oh, please," I replied. "Everyone's being way too dramatic about this." "Dramatic?" Jennifer's voice was incredulous. "You just humiliated an elderly couple in public for no reason other than your own entertainment." "They're not elderly. They're in their 60s, and I wasn't entertaining myself. I was being honest about something that needed to be addressed." "What needed to be addressed?" Dave demanded. "Their appearance. Who made you the appearance police? Someone who actually cares enough to tell the truth instead of enabling their delusions." Elliot stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I can't do this anymore." "Elliot, where are you going?" I called as he headed toward the exit. "Home, alone." I looked around the table at the remaining guests. Their expressions ranged from disgusted to pitying, and none of them were looking at me with anything resembling support. "Well," I said, trying to salvage some dignity, "I guess the party's over." "It was over the minute you opened your mouth," Dave replied. I gathered my purse and coat, leaving cash on the table for my portion of the bill. As I walked past the other diners, I could feel their stares and hear their whispered conversations. By tomorrow, this story would be all over our social circle. When I got home, Elliot was in the guest bedroom with the door locked. I knocked several times, but he wouldn't answer. "Elliot, we need to talk about this rationally," I called through the door. Silence. "You're overreacting. Everyone's overreacting. I was just trying to help your parents improve themselves." Still nothing. I went to bed alone, telling myself that everyone would calm down in a few days and see that I'd been right to speak up. Someone needed to tell Martin and Elspeth the truth about their appearance, and at least I'd had the courage to do it. But as I lay in the dark, I couldn't shake the image of Elspeth's tears, or the way Mila had looked so confused and scared. Maybe I had gone a little too far. Just a little, though. The next morning, Elliot was gone before I woke up. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Staying at Dave's for a few days. Need space to think." I crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash. If he wanted to be dramatic about the whole situation, That was his choice. I had work to focus on, and frankly, the house was more peaceful without his constant disapproval hanging over everything. At work, Casey immediately noticed my mood. "Rough night?" he asked, appearing at my cubicle with 2 cups of coffee. "You could say that," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Elliot's being incredibly immature about something that happened at dinner last night." "Want to talk about it?" I found myself telling Casey the entire story, though I may have edited some of the details to make myself sound more reasonable. In my version, Martin and Elspeth had been making passive-aggressive comments about my career all evening, and I'd simply defended myself with some honest observations about their own shortcomings. "Sounds like you stood up for yourself," Casey said supportively. "Good for you." "Exactly. But now Elliot's acting like I committed some unforgivable sin. Maybe he's just not strong enough to handle a woman who speaks her mind." That evening, Casey offered to take me to dinner to cheer me up. We went to a quiet bistro across town, somewhere we were unlikely to run into anyone from our office or my social circle. Over wine and pasta, our conversation grew increasingly intimate. "You deserve someone who appreciates your honesty," Casey said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Someone who sees your strength instead of trying to diminish it." I didn't pull my hand away. Sometimes I wonder if I married the wrong person. It's not too late to fix that mistake. When Casey walked me to my car, he kissed me. It was gentle at first, then more passionate. I kissed him back, feeling desired and appreciated for the first time in months. "This is complicated," I whispered against his lips. "The best things usually are," he replied. I drove home in a daze, my lips still tingling from Casey's kiss. When I got to the house, I was surprised to find Sophie's car in the driveway. My sister was waiting for me in the living room, and she didn't look happy. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "About what?" "About the fact that half of Elliot's friends have been calling me, asking if you're having some kind of breakdown." I sat down across from her, trying to appear calm. "I'm not having a breakdown. I'm just tired of pretending everything is perfect when it's not." "Zuleika, you called your in-laws ugly. Twice. In public." I made some honest observations about their appearance, yes. "Honest observations?" Sophie's voice rose. "You humiliated 2 people who have never done anything but welcome you into their family." "They judge me constantly." "No, they don't. You project your own insecurities onto them and then attack them for it." I felt my temper flare. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know that Elliot called me crying last night." "Crying, Zuleika. I've never heard him cry before." "He's being overly emotional about this whole thing." Sophie stared at me for a long moment. "Do you even love him anymore?" The question caught me off guard. "Of course I love him." "Then why are you trying so hard to destroy your marriage?" "I'm not trying to destroy anything. I'm just not going to apologize for being honest." "There's a difference between being honest and being cruel, and you've crossed that line." After Sophie left, I poured myself a large glass of wine and tried to process everything that had happened. Maybe I had been a little harsh with Martin and Elspeth, but they needed to hear the truth. And maybe Elliot was more hurt than I'd realized, but that wasn't entirely my fault either. My phone buzzed with a text from Casey. "Hope you're okay. Here if you need to talk." I smiled and typed back, "Thank you for tonight. I needed that. Anytime. You deserve to be happy." I deleted the text thread and finished my wine, feeling better than I had in days. At least someone understood me. When Elliot came home the next evening to get more clothes, I tried to talk to him. "We need to work this out," I said, following him to the bedroom. "We can't keep avoiding each other forever." "I'm not avoiding you," he replied without looking at me. "I'm protecting myself." "From what?" "From the person you've become." "I haven't become anyone. I'm the same person I've always been." Elliot finally looked at me, and I was shocked by the sadness in his eyes. "No, Zuleika, you're not. The woman I married was kind. She was thoughtful. She cared about other people's feelings. I still care about people's feelings. You called my parents ugly, in front of our friends, on my birthday. I made some observations about their appearance that someone needed to make. No one needed to make those observations. No one wanted to hear them. You said them because you wanted to hurt people. That's not true, isn't it? He zipped up his suitcase and headed for the door. When's the last time you said something kind about anyone? When's the last time you showed genuine concern for someone other than yourself? I couldn't answer that question, so I went on the offensive instead. When's the last time you supported me? When's the last time you took my side instead of everyone else's? I would take your side if you were ever right about anything anymore. He left, and I didn't see him for another week. 2 months passed in a blur of late work nights, secret dinners with Casey, and increasingly hostile encounters with Elliot during his brief visits to collect mail and clothes. Our friends had clearly chosen sides, and it wasn't my side. Dave wouldn't return my calls, Jennifer had unfriended me on social media, and even casual acquaintances seemed to be avoiding me at social events. I told myself it didn't matter. They were all just too narrow-minded to understand my perspective. Casey, meanwhile, had become my primary source of emotional support. Our relationship had evolved from friendly conversations to passionate encounters in hotel rooms across the city. He made me feel beautiful, intelligent, and appreciated. Everything Elliot had stopped making me feel. "You're wasted on him," Casey whispered one afternoon, as we lay in bed at the downtown Marriott. "A woman like you deserves someone who recognizes her worth." "I'm starting to think you're right," I replied, tracing patterns on his chest. "What are you going to do about it?" "I don't know yet. Divorce is so complicated, especially with assets and everything we've built together." "But you're not happy." "No, I'm not." What I didn't tell Casey was that Elliot had been asking increasingly specific questions about my whereabouts. He'd started checking credit card statements and asking about charges he didn't recognize. When I explained them as work expenses or shopping trips, he accepted my answers, but I could see the suspicion growing in his eyes. One evening, I came home to find Elliot sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of him. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" I tried to keep my voice casual as I hung up my coat. "About these." He gestured to the papers. "Credit card statements, phone records, hotel charges." My heart started racing, but I forced myself to remain calm. "What about them?" "The Marriott downtown, the Hilton on 5th Street, the boutique hotel in Westfield, all charged to our joint credit card, all on days when you said you were working late." "I've been entertaining clients. You know how important relationship building is in my industry." "Which clients?" I rattled off several names from our current project list, hoping he wouldn't actually verify the information. "And they all required hotel meetings?" "Some of them prefer privacy for sensitive business discussions." Elliot stared at me for a long moment. "Zuleika, I want to believe you. I want to trust you. But everything about your behavior over the past few months suggests that you're lying to me." "I'm not lying about anything." "Then prove it. Show me your phone." "Excuse me?" "Your phone. If you're not hiding anything, show me your text messages and call logs." I felt a surge of indignation. "I'm not showing you my phone. I'm entitled to some privacy, even in marriage." "Privacy, yes. Secrecy, no." "There's no secrecy. There's just respect for personal boundaries, which apparently you don't understand." Elliot's shoulders sagged. "I used to trust you completely. I never questioned where you were or what you were doing because I believed in us. But now..." "Now what?" "Now I feel like I'm married to a stranger who lies to me about everything and treats the people I love like garbage." "I don't treat people like garbage." "You called my parents ugly, repeatedly, in public." "We're not talking about your parents right now. We're talking about your character, and my parents are absolutely relevant to that conversation." I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. "I don't have to listen to this." "Where are you going?" "Somewhere I don't have to defend every decision I make to someone who's supposed to love and support me." I drove straight to Casey's apartment, my hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. When he opened the door, I fell into his arms. "He's getting suspicious," I said against his shoulder. "About us?" "About something. He's been going through credit card statements and asking about hotel charges." Casey pulled back to look at me. "Maybe it's time to make a clean break." "What do you mean?" "Leave him, file for divorce, start fresh with someone who actually values you." The idea was tempting, but the practical implications were daunting. Elliot and I owned a house together, had joint bank accounts, shared investments. Divorce would be messy and expensive. "It's not that simple," I said. "It could be. You're a successful woman with your own career. You don't need him." That night, I stayed at Casey's apartment, telling myself I was just avoiding another confrontation with Elliot. But deep down, I knew I was crossing a line that would be impossible to uncross. When I finally went home the next evening, Elliot was waiting for me with a suitcase. "I'm moving out," he said simply. "Elliot, we can work this out." "No, we can't. You're having an affair." My blood ran cold. "What makes you think that?" "Because I know you, Zuleika. Or at least I knew you. The woman I married wouldn't disappear for entire nights without explanation. She wouldn't lie about hotel charges, and she definitely wouldn't look me in the eye and deny something we both know is true. I wanted to confess everything, to beg for forgiveness and promise to end things with Casey, but my pride wouldn't let me. "I'm not having an affair," I said instead. Elliot nodded sadly. "Then I guess we have nothing left to talk about." He picked up his suitcase and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" I called after him. "To see a lawyer." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who made me sign for them like they were some kind of precious cargo. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the legal documents that would dissolve 8 years of marriage, and felt a strange mix of relief and panic. Elliot was asking for joint custody of any future children, which didn't apply to us, an equitable division of assets, and spousal support for neither party. It was all very civilized and reasonable, which somehow made it worse than if he'd been vindictive. I called Casey immediately. "He filed for divorce," I said without preamble. "Good," Casey replied. "Now you can move on with your life." "It's not that simple. There are lawyers involved, and asset division, and everyone's going to know that our marriage failed." "Your marriage was already over, Zuleika. This just makes it official." That afternoon, I met with Patricia Henley, the divorce attorney my sister had recommended. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in high-conflict divorces. "What grounds is your husband citing?" she asked, reviewing the paperwork. "Irreconcilable differences." "And is there any truth to that?" I hesitated. "We've been having problems." "What kind of problems?" I gave her a sanitized version of events, focusing on Elliot's lack of support for my career and his family's treatment of me. I didn't mention the affair or the incidents with his parents. "Has there been any infidelity on either side?" "No," I lied smoothly. Patricia made notes on her legal pad. "What kind of settlement are you hoping for?" "I want half of everything. The house, the savings, his retirement account. I contributed to this marriage for 8 years, and I deserve my fair share." "That's reasonable. Do you have any concerns about his demands?" "I don't think he should get half the house. I've been making the mortgage payments for the past 6 months while he's been staying with friends." "We can argue that point. Anything else?" I thought about mentioning the way Elliot had been checking up on me, going through credit card statements and demanding to see my phone, but decided it might raise questions I didn't want to answer. "I just want this to be over quickly," I said instead. The mediation session was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, I threw myself into work and spent most evenings with Casey. He was supportive and understanding, everything Elliot hadn't been during the final months of our marriage. "Once this is all settled, we can be together properly," he said one evening, as we shared dinner at our usual restaurant. No more sneaking around, no more hotel rooms. We can build something real. I'd like that, I replied, though something in his tone made me uneasy. The day of mediation arrived sooner than I'd expected. Patricia and I met at the law offices of Morrison, Klein and Associates, a sterile conference room with fluorescent lighting and uncomfortable chairs. Elliot was already there with his attorney, an older man named Robert Chen, who had a reputation for being thorough and fair. Elliot looked different, thinner, more serious, but also somehow stronger. He nodded politely when I entered, but didn't meet my eyes. "Let's begin with asset division," said the mediator, a neutral third party named Susan Walsh. "I understand you own a home together, have joint savings and checking accounts, and individual retirement funds." Patricia launched into our demands, half of everything, including Elliot's retirement account, plus temporary spousal support, while I transitioned to single life. Robert Chen listened patiently, then opened a folder on the table. "Before we discuss asset division," he said calmly, "there are some issues we need to address regarding the grounds for divorce." My stomach dropped. "My client has evidence that Mrs. Renshaw has been engaged in an extramarital affair for approximately 4 months. Patricia shot me a sharp look. I'd specifically told her there had been no infidelity. "What kind of evidence?" Patricia asked. Robert slid a stack of photographs across the table. My hand shook as I looked at them. Images of Casey and me entering hotels, kissing in restaurant parking lots, holding hands as we walked down the street. Someone had been following us. "We also have credit card records showing hotel charges that correspond with these photographs," Robert continued, "as well as phone records showing frequent calls and texts between Mrs. Renshaw and Mr. Casey Vole." Susan Walsh reviewed the evidence with professional detachment. "Mrs. Renshaw, do you dispute these allegations?" I looked at Patricia, who was clearly furious that I'd lied to her. I looked at Elliot, who was staring at his hands. I looked at the photographs that made my affair impossible to deny. "No," I whispered. "I don't dispute them." "In that case," Robert said, "my client is requesting a revised settlement. Given the adultery, he believes he's entitled to a larger share of the marital assets, particularly the house, which he's been paying for while Mrs. Renshaw used marital funds to finance her affair." The room started spinning. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to get half of everything and walk away with my dignity intact. "Furthermore," Robert continued, "my client has evidence that Mrs. Renshaw has engaged in a pattern of emotional abuse toward his family members, including public humiliation and verbal attacks." He produced another folder, this one containing witness statements from the restaurant incidents, photographs from social media, and even a recording someone had made of me insulting Martin and Elspeth at Elliot's birthday dinner. "This is character assassination," Patricia protested. "This is documentation of behavior that's relevant to the divorce proceedings," Robert replied calmly. Susan Walsh looked at me with something resembling pity. "Mrs. Renshaw, given this evidence, I think you should seriously consider accepting a reduced settlement. Adultery and emotional abuse are not going to play well if this case goes to court." I felt trapped, cornered, exposed. Everything I'd done in private was now laid out on a conference table for strangers to examine and judge. "What is your client proposing?" Patricia asked. "Mrs. Renshaw keeps her car, her personal belongings, and her retirement account," Robert said. "Mr. Renshaw keeps the house, the joint savings, and his retirement account. No spousal support for either party." "That's hardly equitable," Patricia objected. "It's more than generous, given the circumstances." I looked at Elliot, who was finally meeting my eyes. There was no anger in his expression, just sadness and disappointment. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why did you throw away everything we built together?" I wanted to explain about feeling unappreciated, about his family's judgment, about Casey making me feel valued and desired, but sitting in that sterile conference room, surrounded by evidence of my betrayal and cruelty, all my justification sounded hollow. I don't know, I said honestly. I loved you, Elliot continued, even after you humiliated my parents, even when I suspected you were lying to me, I still loved you. I would have forgiven the affair if you'd been honest about it. I'm sorry, I whispered. I know you are, but sorry doesn't undo the damage. Susan Walsh cleared her throat. Mrs. Renshaw, what's your response to the proposed settlement? I looked at Patricia, who shook her head slightly. We both knew I had no leverage left. I accept, I said. The papers were drawn up that afternoon. By 5 o'clock, my 8-year marriage was officially over, and I was walking out of the law office with nothing but my car keys and a crushing sense of loss. Casey was waiting for me in the parking lot. How did it go? He asked. Terrible. He had evidence of our affair, photographs, everything. Casey's face went pale. Photographs? Someone was following us. There are pictures of us together, hotel records, phone logs. Shit. Casey ran his hands through his hair. This is bad. It's over now. I signed the papers. Zuleika, I need to tell you something. Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. What? I've been thinking about this whole situation, and I think we should take a break. A break? This divorce is going to be messy, and people at work are starting to talk. I can't afford to have my reputation damaged by association. I stared at him in disbelief. You're abandoning me. I'm protecting both of us. I just lost everything for you. My marriage, my house, my savings, everything. You lost those things because of your own choices. Choices I made because you encouraged me to. Casey backed away from me. I never told you to insult your husband's parents or lie to him about where you were. Those were your decisions. But you said I deserved better. You said I should leave him. I said a lot of things. That doesn't make me responsible for your actions. He got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot of the law office, where I'd just signed away my entire life. I sat in my car for an hour, crying and trying to figure out what to do next. I had nowhere to go. The house belonged to Elliot now, and I couldn't afford a hotel indefinitely on my salary alone. Finally, I called Sophie. Can I stay with you for a few days? I asked. What happened? I told her everything. The affair, the divorce, Casey's abandonment, the settlement that left me with almost nothing. I'll pick you up, she said without hesitation. As I waited for my sister, I thought about the chain of events that had led me to this moment. It had started with cruel comments about Martin and Elspeth's appearance, escalated through months of lies and betrayal, and ended with me losing everything that had ever mattered. The worst part wasn't the financial loss or even the public humiliation. The worst part was the look in Elliot's eyes when he'd asked me why I'd thrown away everything we'd built together. I still didn't have a good answer to that question. When Sophie arrived, she helped me load my remaining possessions into her car. As we drove away from the law office, I saw Elliot's car in the parking lot. He was sitting behind the wheel, talking on his phone, probably telling his parents that the divorce was final. I wondered if they felt vindicated, knowing that the woman who'd insulted them had lost everything in the end. They probably did. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. For the first time in months, I had to admit that I might have been wrong about everything, but it was too late to fix any of it now. The damage was done, the papers were signed, and I was starting over with nothing but the clothes in my suitcase and the bitter knowledge that I'd destroyed my own life through sheer cruelty and selfishness. As we drove through the city streets towards Sophie's apartment, I realized that this was what rock bottom felt like, and I had no one to blame but myself.